Kuzuzang Pola. This is a science lesson for stage 3, that is for class 7 and 8. And I am Nimastring, a teacher of Samteng Higher Secondary School under Wang Di Zonghak. Before starting the new topic, I would like to request the students to wonder about this question. That is, can you name the process through which our body gets oxygen? How does oxygen help our body? Now let's discuss about this. How do we get energy to do our regular activities? And did you ever wonder about what is the connection between the oxygen and the cramps that you experience after you run or work or play? So in order to solve these questions, let's start a new topic called as respiratory system. So in order to learn about respiratory system, I have set 6 objectives, and they are: firstly, by the end of the lesson, students should be able to explain respiration in their own words. Then we have state the general equation of respiration. Then we have identify at least 3 organs that assist in respiration. State at least one function, each for the respective organs that assist respiration. Number 5, draw the relationship between breathing and respiration. And finally, state at least 2 measures to maintain the respiratory system. So now, as we discuss few questions to be wondered in the very initial period of this lesson, so let's talk about what actually is breathing. So breathing is defined as the process of taking in air and taking out air. However, there is a common misconceptions or common mistakes our students usually make. So while defining breathing, our students normally define breathing as the process of taking in oxygen and taking out carbon dioxide. But be mindful that the air we breathe in, it contains oxygen, carbon dioxide and other gases. Likewise, even the air we breathe out has carbon dioxide, oxygen and other gases. The difference is the air we breathe in has more amount of oxygen and less amount of other gases, whereas the air we breathe out has more amount of carbon dioxide and lesser amount of oxygen. So breathing basically involves inhalation and exhalation. So let's talk about what actually is inhalation. So inhalation is also called as inspiration. That means it is taking in air. So the air we breathe in or the air we take in is usually cooler, it's cool, and it contains more amount of oxygen. Likewise, exhalation. Exhalation is also called as expiration or expiration, and it basically means taking out air. And the air we expire out is usually warmer. If you do not believe me, why don't you experience it yourself? So, in order to experience whether the air we breathe out is warmer or not, just keep your hands up, then blow your air out. Feel it, it's warmer. And the air we expire out, it contains more amount of carbon dioxide. Now let's talk about what actually happens when we breathe in, when we inhale in the air. So when we inhale in the air through the nose, what happens is our ribs, it goes outward and upward. Let's try it out. See, it goes upward and outward. Hope you have understood this. Now the next thing that happens while inhaling the air is, when you inhale in air, the size of the lungs will get bigger because the air gets filled inside the lungs. So when the size of the lungs gets bigger, what happens is the diaphragm, can you see the picture there? The diaphragm gets flattened because the lungs pushes the diaphragm. Diaphragm is usually dome in shape. So when the size of the lungs gets bigger, what happens is it flattens the diaphragm. I hope you are clear about it. Once again, so let's say this is a lungs, this is the diaphragm. So diaphragm sits beneath the lungs. So when you take in the air, what happens is the lungs gets bigger. When the lungs gets bigger, the diaphragm gets flattened. I hope you are clear now. Anyhow, we'll talk about this in more detail in the later part of this class. So in order to make your understanding better, let's say this is the nose, we have the pharynx, we have the windpipe, or which is also called as trachea, then we have the lungs, and we have the diaphragm. I said diaphragms are usually dome in shape. So when you take in the air, what happens is the size of the lungs gets bigger, because when the lungs gets inflated, what happens is it pushes the diaphragm and makes the diaphragm flat. So that is what happens when you take in the air, when you inhale in the air. Now let's talk about the ribs. I said when you take in the air, the ribs will come outward and upward. So when you take in the air, the ribs will come upward and outward. It will come outward and upward. Now let's talk about what happens when we exhale out the air, when we breathe out the air. So when we breathe out the air, what happens is the ribs, the chest, the thoracic cavity, what happens is it comes inward and downward. Inward and downward. So let's try to experiment that. So when we breathe in the air, the ribs came outward and upward. See, it came outward and upward. Now let's breathe out the air. I said when you breathe out the air, the ribs will come downward and inward. See? See? Inward and downward. So this is what happens to the ribs when you breathe out the air. And we also know that when we took the air inside, the lungs got inflated. Whereas when we exhale out the air, the lungs will get deflated. It will get deflated because the air goes out of your body. That's why the lungs become smaller, deflated. Now, I also said that the diaphragm is usually dome in shape. When you inhaled the air, the dome-shaped diaphragm will become flat. Whereas when you exhale out the air, that means your lungs is becoming deflated. That means your flat diaphragm will come back to its original position, the dome shape. So let's look into how it happens actually. So this is the nose, then we have the pharynx, then we have the windpipe, then we have the lungs, we have the diaphragm. So let's say the red dot as air here. So when you exhale out the air, what happens is the lungs will constrict. It will become smaller because the air goes out. Then this diaphragm will come back to its normal position, that is dome shape. Then what happens to the ribs? It will come inward and downward. So let's say this thick yellow line as the ribs. So let's see. So it comes inward and downward. So in order to better understand inhalation and exhalation, let's watch this video.
The respiratory system is made up of three major parts: the airway, the lungs, and the muscles for breathing. Your airway consists of your nose, mouth, throat, and trachea, also known as the windpipe. Your lungs are responsible for getting air into your body. As the air passes through the trachea, it enters the lungs. This is where oxygen in a person's breath enters the bloodstream. At the same time, the waste from the blood, called carbon dioxide, is transferred into the lungs and then exhaled. Passing oxygen through the lungs is dependent on the surrounding muscles. The main breathing muscle is the diaphragm. The diaphragm muscle is just below your rib cage and under the lungs. It works like a pump, pulling oxygen into your lungs and pushing carbon dioxide out. Breathing does not depend on the diaphragm alone. There are other muscles that assist the breathing effort. These include muscles surrounding the ribs, abdominal or belly muscles, muscles in the neck, shoulders, and chest. When inhaling, the muscles in the chest, neck, and shoulders all expand the chest wall to help pull air into the lungs. When exhaling, the muscles relax.
So far, we have learned about what actually is breathing, then we have learned about inhalation and exhalation. We have also learned about those organs that are involved in breathing. So now let's try to recapitulate what we have learned about inhalation and exhalation. So let's try to see the difference between inhalation and exhalation. So at the left hand corner we have inhalation, the right hand corner we have exhalation, and in the middle we have the activities that is happening in the organs during inhalation and exhalation. So firstly, let's talk about the first one, the diaphragm shape. The shape of the diaphragm. So what happens during inhalation, during exhalation? So the shape of the diaphragm becomes flat when you inhale in the air. When you exhale the air, the diaphragm shape will become dome shape. So you should remember the shape of the diaphragm is usually dome. But when you inhale in the air, it becomes flat. When you exhale out air, it comes back to its normal shape. Now let's talk about diaphragm muscle. So the muscle of the diaphragm during inhalation contracts. It contracts, become contracted, becomes small. Whereas during exhalation, the muscle of the diaphragm, it gets relaxed. It comes back to its normal position. Now let's talk about what happens to the ribs. So during inhalation, the ribs will come upward and outward. It will come up and out. Likewise, in exhalation, the ribs will come down and in, down and in. Now let's talk about what happens to the lungs. So during inhalation, since the air comes inside the lungs will get inflated, the lungs will become bigger. That's how this lung pushes the diaphragm, and diaphragm becomes flat, right? During exhalation, the air goes out of the body. That's why the lungs will get deflated. That means become smaller. That's how the diaphragm comes back to its normal shape, that is the dome shape. Okay, now let's talk about the functions of those organs that are involved in breathing. So firstly, let's talk about the nose. So nose is the first organ from where the air gets inside our body. So it contains a hair-like structure called as cilia, and these cilia actually traps the dust particles entering our body. It also cleans the air. Let's talk about pharynx now. So pharynx is also called as throat, and it regulates the passage of air in the lungs. Now let's talk about trachea. So trachea is also called as the windpipe. So the function of trachea is it connects the throat to the lungs, and it also helps in the passage of air inside the body. Likewise, near this trachea and pharynx, there is another structure called as epiglottis, which actually controls the opening and closing of trachea and esophagus. Now let's talk about diaphragm. So diaphragm contracts and expands during the breathing to create vacuum effect for lungs to pull in air or remove air. Now let's talk about lungs. So lungs is the main organ for exchange of gases. So it is in the lungs where exchange of gases occurs. So lungs consist of millions of alveoli. So alveoli means air sac. So this air sac is surrounded by a lot of capillaries. Now let's elaborate a little bit about how exchange of gases occurs. So let's discuss about how gases gets exchanged inside the lungs. So I said the lungs have millions of alveoli or air sac, and every air sac is covered or connected by capillaries. So the fresh air or the inhaled air contains a lot of oxygen. So this oxygen gets diffused inside the capillaries, and these capillaries actually take the oxygen to various parts of the body. Likewise, this blood vessel also brings carbon dioxide from different parts of the body, and it deposits it inside the alveoli, and later through lungs it goes out of our body. So this is how gases gets exchanged inside the lungs. Now, have you wondered about how our body produces carbon dioxide? I'm still waiting. Have you ever wondered about that? So my dear students, our body produces carbon dioxide through a process called as respiration. So carbon dioxide is a result of respiration. So that's why let's talk about respiration. So firstly, let's define what actually is respiration. So respiration is defined as the biological process involving the production of energy, typically with the intake of oxygen and the release of carbon dioxide from the oxidation of complex organic substance. In a simple way, respiration can also be defined as a process of producing energy with the help of oxidation of food in presence of oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Now we know the definition of respiration. You should also know that respiration occurs in all the cells, because every cell requires energy. That's why respiration occurs in all the cells. Now let's talk about the types of respiration. So there are two types of respiration. One is called as the aerobic respiration and the other one is called anaerobic respiration. So firstly, let's discuss about what actually is aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration means those respiration that occurs or that happens in presence of oxygen. So now let's talk about the equation of aerobic respiration. So in aerobic respiration, the food, glucose, combines with oxygen that comes through breathing and forms carbon dioxide, water and energy. So this is the equation. Glucose C6H12O6 plus oxygen 6O2 gives carbon dioxide 6CO2 plus water 6H2O plus energy 38 ATP. Remember 38 ATP. I'm asking you to remember because we are going to use this 38 ATP in the later part. And remember, aerobic respiration is same for both plant as well as animals. Now we'll learn about anaerobic respiration. So firstly, let's define about anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration means those respiration that occurs in absence of oxygen. But remember, anaerobic respiration occurs for a short period of time only. Normally, aerobic respiration. I said while explaining about aerobic respiration that aerobic respiration is same for both plants as well as animals. But whereas in anaerobic respiration, it is different for plants and it is different for animals. How? Let's see. Now let's talk about anaerobic respiration in plants. So firstly, the general equation, that is glucose in absence of oxygen produces ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. Glucose C6H12O6 produces ethanol 2C2H5OH plus carbon dioxide plus energy. So the equation is carbon dioxide CO2, energy 2 ATP. 2 ATP, just 2 ATP. If you recollect what we have learned under aerobic respiration is 38 ATP. Okay, so the example of anaerobic respiration in plants is it occurs during fermentation. Now let's talk about anaerobic respiration in animals. So in animals, the equation is glucose in absence of oxygen produces lactic acid 2CH3CHOH COOH, that is for lactic acid, plus energy, that is 2 ATP. So here 2 ATP. Aerobic respiration 38 ATP. So that's the difference in the amount of energy released during aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So the example of anaerobic respiration in animals is muscle fatigue and cramps. So we usually get muscle cramps and muscle fatigues when we do exercises, when we run, when we play, when we work. Why do you think this happens? This happens because of the storage of lactic acid, that lactic acid in the muscles. So when lactic acid is stored in the muscles, what happens is there is pain, there is cramps. Our muscle becomes tired. So this happens because our body has shortage of oxygen. When our body has shortage of oxygen, anaerobic respiration happens. When anaerobic respiration happens, lactic acid is formed. So this lactic acid gets stored in our muscles, whereby we will have pain, cramps and fatigue. So our body having shortage of oxygen, that condition is called as oxygen debt. It's called oxygen debt. Now let's try to differentiate between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So in aerobic respiration, we know that it occurs in presence of oxygen, whereas Anaerobic respiration, it occurs in absence of oxygen. Likewise, aerobic respiration produces more energy, 38 ATP, whereas anaerobic respiration produces less energy, just 2 ATP. Aerobic respiration, lactic acid is not produced. Neither ethanol is produced, right? Whereas in anaerobic respiration, lactic acid is produced, ethanol is produced. Aerobic respiration is same for both plants as well as animals, whereas it is different for plants and animals. In plants, it produces ethanol and carbon dioxide, whereas in animals, it just produces lactic acid. And this aerobic respiration occurs both in the cytoplasm as well as mitochondria, whereas anaerobic respiration occurs only in the cytoplasm. So my dear students, breathing and respirations are two different entities. Breathing and respirations is not same. So that's why let's try to find out why breathing and respiration is not same. So let's recollect what we have learned. Lungs contains millions of alveoli or air sac, and the air sac is surrounded by network of capillaries. And we also have learned that respiration results in producing carbon dioxide. Likewise, we also know that inhalation brings in more oxygen. We know that oxygen gets diffused in the capillaries and oxygen reaches different parts of the body. We also know that in return, carbon dioxide reaches the lungs, which is exhaled out. Now I will try to differentiate how breathing and respiration is different. So, while you respire, you need oxygen. That oxygen is brought inside the body through the process of breathing. Hope I am making it clear. Respiration needs oxygen, and that oxygen is brought inside the body through the process called as breathing. Now, when you exhale out carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is the byproduct of respiration. In breathing, you just involve inhalation, exhalation. In respiration, what happens is the food, glucose, combines with oxygen that comes from breathing and forms energy. It forms carbon dioxide. I hope I'm making it clear. So that's why breathing and respiration is never same. It's different. Now let's talk about effects of smoking on lungs. How smoking, which is the general trend amongst people, like smoking is taken as pride. But my dear students, we should also know that smoking affects our lungs. So the effects includes emphysema, which means smoking will rupture the alveoli, the air sacs. So if the alveoli is ruptured, there won't be exchange of gases. The next one is cell degeneration. The cell of the lungs will get degenerated. And the third one is the lung cancer. So my dear students, the diseases that I have mentioned look small in words, but these are some of the deadliest diseases. So in order to stay away from this, please, my dear students, don't ever imagine of smoking. If you know anybody smoking, make sure you convey the message that you got from this lesson that is really injurious to smoke. Now let's discuss about how you can maintain your respiratory system. How can you keep those organs that assist respiration healthy? Firstly, you can maintain a healthy weight. Don't be obese, don't be underweight. Maintain your healthy weight. Consume healthy diet. You should eat balanced diet food. You should eat the right amount of food. You should also drink more water, and you should also maintain good hygiene. And you should also do a lot of exercises. So when you do more exercises, there will be more inhalation and exhalation of air. That means more amount of respiration is happening. That means you are getting more energy, you become stronger, you become active. These are some of the measures to maintain your respiratory system. So to conclude, I would like to highlight some of the key points that we have discussed so far. So firstly, we have discussed about breathing helps in respiration. We have also discussed about breathing involves inhalation and exhalation. We have also discussed about nose, pharynx, trachea, lungs and alveoli are organs that assist respiration. We have also learned that air inhaled has more oxygen and air exhaled has more carbon dioxide. We have also discussed that respiration is the process of releasing energy by oxidation of food. We have also discussed about the two types of respiration, that is aerobic and anaerobic respiration. We have also discussed about respiration providing energy for daily activities. We have also discussed about smoking affecting our lungs. We have also discussed about how to maintain our respiratory system. Before I wrap up the lesson for the day, I would like to request the students to explore the following questions. The first question, green plants help to purify the air. Which organ does it correlate with in our body? The second question is, Jigme ran a marathon to commemorate 60th birth anniversary of 4th Drugalpo. She experienced a cramp and fatigue in her leg. What do you think is the cause for the cramp and the fatigue? And the last question that I have for you all is, yeast is used to make the bread fluffy. Can you correlate this with respiration? With this, we come to the end of our lesson. If you have any doubts or queries, do let us know so that we can present it in the next lesson. Thank you.